remained so for 15 years until Grandma Block died. 6 of Dora's 8 children were also born in that house. During the same years, Will and Dora raised a variety of crops. In 1904, they farmed 100 acres of rice, 25 acres of cotton, 5 acres of sugar cane, and 3 acres of watermelons. In 1906, Will built a sugar mill. Dora Coulombe died on March the 7th, 1917, only 2 months after giving birth to Rosadie. Will Block died on February 26, 1933. On my birthday, on your birthday.
The old house in back of the office is, of course, the old Will and Dora Block home, the original home. And Dora Block lived out her entire life there. Mary Lou was the last one born in that house. And let me mention one other thing. In 1970, I was reading microfilm of the Port Arthur Herald, not knowing really what I was fishing for. And I found a full-page article on the Queen's coronation in Nederland, the celebration of the Queen's coronation, that had taken place on September the 6th, 1898, and it is full of Coulombe history, and it's in the microfilm at Port Arthur Public Library.
All right. Great.
Okay, let's move on over to Kate and Gutsa Ringstra. We need to try and Gutsa Ringstra here, but there's so much water there we can't get too close to the grave.
Truncha Kate Coulombe was born in Huxcarpel on February 16, 1877, and was 21 years old when she arrived in Nederland. She and her 2 sisters at first worked as maids in the palatial homes of some of Beaumont's early lumber barons. In 1900, she married Gotse Jan Rienstra, who was born in Parega, Friesland on August 26, 1867, and immigrated to New York in 1895 and later to Orange City, Iowa, where he learned the trade of blacksmith. In May 1897, he became Nederland's first settler when he unloaded his wagon beside the railroad tracks. At first he bought 80 acres of land for $800 and built his home at Avenue H in South 12th Streets, where he and Kate lived out their lives. George made a $10,000 profit on his first rice crop planted in 1899. The couple became the parents of 3 children, sons Jan and Martin and daughter Marie, who married Doc Wilson. George Rienstra became a realtor and surveyed at least 1 real estate edition in Nederland. He died on January 27, 1939, followed by his widow Kate, who died on June 4, 1953.
I've got to tell you this story while I've got you all together. First rent house my first wife and I lived in was over next door to Jan Rienstra's home in Nederland on South 13th. And of course I was renting from time to time. She used to come over and sit on my front porch and we talked a whole lot. Talking about mosquitoes. She told me that all the early Dutch women in Nederland, who of course wore skirts down to their ankles, had a way of trapping all those big old gallernipper mosquitoes big enough to carry off a chicken, like the Sabine Pass mosquitoes, under their skirts. So they would wrap their legs in newspapers and tie them up whenever they went to church and places like that. And whenever they walked, you could hear the swish of the newspaper tied around their leg. I thought that story was worth retelling. Let's move on over here, please. Buried in Shreveport, but we're not about to forget them. And here's a little sketch that I'd like for John Bunyan to read for us, please.
In addition to what I'm going to read, I want to tell you a little story also following. Lawrence Coulombe was born in Huxcarpel in November 1889 and was only 9 years when he immigrated to Nederland. He attended Nederland Public School, in one photo of which he appears prominently with the school children. He also appears in each of 3 separate photos of the Coulombe family taken in 1903 and owned by W.T. Block. Lawrence also appears in a photo of the Texaco baseball team at Port Neches in 1918. In June 1914, he married Myra Cook at what was one of the earliest church weddings in Nederland. Myra's parents, the J.B. Cooks, moved to Nederland from Missouri in 1898 and were founding members of the Nederland Methodist Church in 1900. They built their home at 1516 Detroit, where it still stands, although remodeled. Myra was a musician and was quite involved in church activities. She was the pianist for the First Methodist Church for some 17 to 20 years. Incidentally, I, as a cellist, and my two brothers at violin, joined with her every Sunday morning in providing the voluntary and other music for the congregation. In 1920, Lawrence and Will Block were organizers and directors of the First National Bank of Port Neches. About 1923, Lawrence founded Coulomé Grain Company in Nederland, which he sold out to his brother Martin when the family moved to Freeport in 1937. They founded Coulomé Sales Company, a wholesale radio and electronic parts firm, the side of its building reading Home of Cool, Amazing Service. Lawrence and Myra were parents of three sons, Lawrence, James, and John Bunyan, and they were buried in Shreveport.
That information was passed on to me on the internet by John's son Doug in Washington, D.C., home of Cool Amazing Service. I thought that was cute.
Back in 1960 was my privilege to visit Holland and to go to Hoogkarsel. I couldn't speak any Dutch, and I couldn't find anybody much who could speak or understand English very much, but I did finally manage to find somebody after I had made a side trip to Ankhausen, or how do you pronounce that?
I call it Inquisition. I don't claim to be correct.
It's
Anyway,
Inquisition.
I found some
Inquisition.
Coulomé people there. I couldn't understand them much, and they couldn't understand me much. But on my way over there, I saw an unusual looking house on the right side of the road. And it was so unusual that I stopped and took a picture of it. After that, I took two pictures of it. I went on to Ankhausen, I came back, and I found a young couple who were from, one of them worked at the public office, and they loaded into my rented Volkswagen, and they were going to take me to where my father was. Home in which they lived. We drove out, and I said, "Are we about there?" We kept driving. This was on the 19th of August, 1960, on the anniversary of my father's death. And my father had always wanted to go back to Holland. He never got the opportunity to do so. But on that day, as we traveled out that road toward Ankhausen again, all of a sudden he said, "That's it, right up on the right side." We stopped at the same house as the place I had stopped previously, made two pictures of the house in which my father was born, not knowing that was the place. It was a thrilling story to me. I felt that my father was looking over my shoulder saying, that's it, take it, take that picture." I've shared that picture. That's the picture that appears in some of the material that WT has. The picture I shared with Rosa Dew, and Rosa Dew went crazy with the picture. She asked me if she could share it with other people. I said, by all means. You know, the awful part about it, I've lost that slide of the picture that I made. But I have that framed picture in my bedroom that I look at every day.
We're standing at these two graves here, CBR Carter and Clara Carter. I never really got to know Clara Carter well. She was pretty much of a homebody, although her husband was downtown in Nederland quite often, and I got to talk to him a lot. I often wondered about the name Carter because it's not Dutch, and I often wondered if the Pilgrims who first moved to Holland, he might have been in the city for one of them. Anyway, have I got a volunteer to read this? Come on, Charles, go.
Charles, I thought we're all
I
on.
don't read. I don't read that cool stuff.
Well, this is the first time, or go
Read
ahead.
it
Can I
loud.
just say Clara and the
Yeah, and if you come to a Dutch name, you can't pronounce it.
It's
Say
Oak
Clara and
Seed
say
and Tanta
Florida.
Clara.
Clara Coulomé was born in whatever y'all, Hodge Capel, on October 27th, 1879, and came to Nederland at the age of 19, where she often sang in Dutch with her siblings. Her husband, C.B.R. Carter, was born near Leyden, Holland on December the 16th, 1867. In about 1894, he and his brother Peter immigrated to Pella, Nebraska, where they were wheat farmers until they resettled as rice farmers in Nederland in 1899. That's quite a difference.
Yeah.
Seba and Clara lived for 47 years in their home at Detroit and number 17th Street.
North 7.
Yeah, North 17th, where they own all the land now occupied by Central Middle School and the stadium. Carter raised rice for about 15 years, during which time he acquired the 200 acres of land which now comprise the Carter numbers 1, 2, and 3 realty additions. After 1920, the Carters financed about 100 homes in Port Neches and Nederland, and in so doing accumulated an estate worth $500,000. They had no children. W.T. Block remembers C.B.R. Carter as a well-read, mostly self-educated man who could discourse on any subject coherently. He died on December the 1st, 1947, followed by his wife on November the 29th, 1948.
Okay, now there's more than one set of Martin Coulomé. This grave here is Martin and his wife Edna Lester, who was the only son of Jan Coulomé. This is Tanta Anna and no Martin over here, I believe, in these. Yeah. Okay, we got a lot of water here, so we better not move around too much. In my scrapbooks, I've got a picture of a Martin on heart, proud of. Ralph sent it to me to publish it in the Port Neches book. Had I published it, I knew I would have lost the picture, and I didn't want to lose it. I lost 177 early Port Neches pictures when that. Who wants to read about them?
I will.
Okay, good.
Martin Coulomé Jr. was born on February 17, 1887, arriving at the age of 11. His first teacher in Nederland was his brother Claus. As a youth, Martin worked in the rice fields and a variety of other jobs before he was the first Dutch immigrant drafted into the U.S. Army in August of 1917. Martin served in France as a sergeant in Company B, 601st Engineer Battalion. After the war, Martin married Anna Westertorp of Odeborn, Friesland. His family arrived here in December of 1898. Their only child is Reverend Ralph Coulomé of St. Louis. Martin and Anna operated a dairy at LaBelle for a few years. Martin founded Coulomé Grain Company at Port Neches about 1925. At first at the intersection of the railroad with Knoll Street and later on Grigsby Street. In 1938, he bought Coulomé Grain Company of Nederland from his brother Lawrence, which he later sold out in 1943. Martin then went to work at the rubber plant, then being built in Port Neches, remaining there until he retired. Anna Coulomé was active in First Methodist Church of Port Neches. Martin died in Port Neches on July 3, 1965, and Anna died in Wisconsin on October 12, 1977, at the age of 92, making her the last survivor of the original Dutch colony that arrived in 1898. The second son was born in Hooperspel on February 1st, 1876. When he arrived in Nederland in 1898, he worked at first for the railroad, and as he and the family could accumulate land, John, Peter, and Claus raised rice in their effort to help support the family. Gradually, John broke away to acquire land of his own and a dairy herd of about 125 Holstein milk cows. About 1902, he married Stellings, who was born in Holland on November 3rd, 1874, and they became the parents of one son, Martin, who about 1948 became a cattleman at Winning. John acquired about 250 acres of land between Helena Street and Spurlock Road. The John and Martin Coulomé homes still stand at the intersection of number 27th or North 27th and Canal Streets. Between 1918 and 1930, the John Coulomé Dairy reached its zenith, milking 300 gallons daily and delivering about 1,200 quart bottles of milk in Beaumont and Port Arthur in 3 or 4 delivery trucks. John also owned 20 acres of Satsuma orange trees, from which he sometimes harvested several thousand bushels of fruit. One more time. Yelka Coulomé died in January 1941, and at a later date John remarried before he died on February 3rd, 1948. And just to add to that, my husband's family, his grandfather had a grocery store in Beaumont back then, and he said the best milk was from the Coulomé Dairy. Isn't that funny? That's what my mother-in-law told me.
The best oranges were
most
from
of
the
you have
orchard.
seen
I thought that was neat.
most of you have seen the Coulomé history in the Dutch book published in Holland this past April will see the picture says Coulomé milk sold here. One other thing I wanted to add, Martin Coulomé Jr. and Anna Coulomé Cooley, Klaus and Jen each moved back to Holland for about up to 2 years. And Martin and Anna were both born in Holland before they came back to the States. I don't know, I think Jen never did get back to Holland, did he? I don't believe he only planned a trip about 1941 and his first wife died. And I don't think Uncle Klaus ever got back either, I'm not sure. Okay, who wants to read? You want to read the Klaus Coulomé?
Sure.
Files in there. We don't want to forget any of them.
Come on and get your card, though. You get down long enough.
Okay, I'm just waiting a minute because I'm not a really loud
Why
person.
don't you get over in the shade a little bit and you won't be so hot moving.
I wanted to be by their grave though.
Yeah.
Okay. Klaus Coulomé was born in Hoogerspel, and I don't say that right, Hoogerspel in 1882, and was the only family member who spoke English on arrival here. Klaus had also become a photographer in Holland, and all of the earliest photos of Nederland were made by him. Klaus married Nellie Rienstra, sister of his brother-in-law George, and the couple returned to Holland briefly in 1904, where they operated a photo studio in Bolsward, Holland, and where daughter Anna was born in 1905. They returned to Texas in 1906, and Klaus spent the next 12 years as a postman in Beaumont. In 1918, he became Nederland's postmaster in conjunction with his grain store on Boston Avenue. In 1925, he bought a fig orchard in Winnie, returning to Nederland in 1932. Klaus at one time operated a dairy in Rosedale, became Nederland's first city manager in 1940, and clerked in the Nederland post office between 1946 and 1949. W.T. Block worked side by side with Klaus during those later years and lived only 2 blocks from him on Gary, and they often visited in each other's homes. And this is W.T. standing right over here. He knew Klaus and Nellie to be devout Christians and members of the Methodist Church. Nellie Coulomé died in 1963, followed by Klaus a year later, and they were the parents of Anna Cooley, Carl John Coulomé, and Katie Smith. And when we go to the Methodist Church for the potluck and the Coulomé family reunion, I think that reunion is basically the family of Carl John Coulomé, who's the son of Klaus Coulomé.
How about Adrian? I think Adrian Cooley might be here. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone's got any. I'd like to say one other thing about Klaus Coulomé. I worked side by side with him. He always talked with a quite mild voice. I never heard a bad word uttered out of that man's speech. And I sincerely believe that he was a very devout Christian gentleman. Would you have anything? Well, that concludes the graves of
Incidentally, my father was the only one of the children of the Coulomé family who did not speak with a Dutch accent.
That's right.
He was young enough that he had not taken on that accent, and He could rattle off Dutch when he's talking with them and then rattle off English when he's talking with us. But when he wanted to say something he didn't want us to know about, he'd talk to them in Dutch.
Well, that concludes our little program down here. I hope you enjoyed it, maybe even learned something.
Yeah, thanks,
Debbie T,
Yeah.
would you just fill us in about the beginning blocks, like they started up the river up here and who ended up up and down there?
Well, the blocks, after the Grigsbys left Port Neches, the blocks moved here in 1846, and they were the only family living here for 2 years. And I guess they got tired of the isolation. They moved to Beaumont in 1848. It stayed there for 6 years until 1854, when they moved back to Port Neches. In 1860, they moved to the mouth of the Sabine River on a place called Pavel's Island, and they had a cypress shingle mill there. And I guess that's where they met all the Smith daughters, which lived on Johnson's Bow. Anyway, great-grandpa and all but one of his sons moved back to Port Neches in 1866. Uncle Charlie moved to Orange and never did come back to Port Neches. And he bought 100 acres where the Port Neches Public Park is today. And the old George Frederick Block home stood until about 1940 on Merriman Street, right where it intersects Lee Street down near the river. I remember the old house before it was torn down. Sometime in the 1920s they added electricity to it. You look at it with the electricity, it doesn't look like too original, but anyway, the only photograph I had of that house showed the electric lines going into it. But not in his day. They moved to Orange. Great-grandpa and 7 of his sons, all except my grandfather, Albert and Ursula Block, moved to Orange in 1882. And I've heard that there was a feud involved between the Blocks and the Rimleys, that great-grandpa was afraid one of them might end up getting killed. Anyway, that is supposition. I don't have any proof of that whatsoever. Anyway, Albert Block moved into the old Gantz home, which probably Mary Lou and I and Otis are the only ones and Alta can remember. Anyway, it was torn down it was built in 1958, torn down in 1937. The boards, the old siding upright boards, were 24 to 30 inches wide. They had been sawn only on 2 sides, and the edges were still like that of the trunk of the tree.
Now, where was that along the river?
No, the old Albert Block home was right up here on the hill, where the same house that Nell, Rosa, I, and Alta and Otis were born in. Right about where Jerry Dews lives now. And Grandpa Block lived there without owning the land. He only bought the house at first from the Gantz family. In 1876, he bought 100 acres of land this side of Port Neches Avenue he paid $5 an acre for it, for $500. In the same year, he acquired 100 acres of land over where he later built his rent houses on the other side of Port Neches Avenue. He bought it on the sheriff's steps at an auction for taxes, and he paid $5 for 100 acres, or 5 cents an acre for it. Altogether, the 200 acres of land cost him 55 cents an acre. Yeah. And that's about all history I can think of already. It's getting hot out here, so I suggest we retire.
Yeah. And everybody, we've got flowers, so